Hello. This video is part of a series about the short story Harrison Bergeron, written by Kurt Vonnegut. This is not essential, but if you want to understand the context and some references I make, I recommend you watch the first video in which I introduce the story and make a review of it. Today we are going to see the possible impact of some of the ideas expressed in the story on the real world, specifically on the world of sports. I'm talking about the policies of the I.O.C, International Olympic Committee, the governing body of the National Olympic Committees, and the IAAF, International Amateur Athletic Federation, the world governing body for the sport of track and field athletics. The policies I'm referring to prescribe rules about hyperandrogenism, which is a medical condition characterized by high levels of androgens in females. An androgen is any natural or synthetic hormone that regulates the development and maintenance of male characteristics in vertebrates. The rules prescribed by the I.O.C and the IAAF mandate female competitors' testosterone levels must be below a certain limit in order to compete. Can we establish a parallel between the impositions in the name of equality shown in Harrison Bergeron and the rules regarding hyperandrogenism? What do you think? Now I'm going to present an article which is an opinion piece defending female competitors' rights to compete even if they have this condition. I don't exactly share the author's opinion, but I thought the article is well thought out and makes good arguments defending a point of view. Here it is. Harrison Bergeron-ing a too exceptional sprinter. There's an article in the NYT today covering one of my philosophy of the body hobby horses. Dutty Chen, an 18-year-old champion sprinter, has been told she must have surgery or start a drug regimen in order to be allowed to compete in official races. The problem? Her body naturally produces more testosterone than usual, and administrators worry it gives her an unfair advantage. Arne Ljungqvist, the longtime chairman of the I.O.C's Medical Commission, said a hyperandrogenism policy was necessary because Olympic sports have an overrepresentation of athletes with both male and female anatomical characteristics. One recent study on women competing at the 2011 Track and Field World Championships found that 7 in 1,000 elite track and field athletes had hyperandrogenism, and some blend of male and female anatomical characteristics. That's 140 times more than expected in the general population. People who say, this is nothing, we don't need this rule, don't know sports or are at some distance from sport, Ljungqvist said. This is not an easy matter, it's an evolving matter. We just can't bury our heads in the sand and pretend these conditions do not exist. My position remains the same as it was when Caster Semenya was under investigation, as I wrote then in the Huffington Post. The idea of trying to titrate an athlete's hormones down to level the playing field is at best hideously complex and at worst impossible. How do you know when the hormone level is fair? Once the athlete stops winning? All athletes are physically and genetically exceptional, drawing advantages from differences in height, metabolism, sleep requirements, or anything else that could have an impact on training or performance. The I.O.C can require these women to reduce the amount of testosterone that they produce, but it should not pretend that it is doing them a favor. A woman is referred to doctors by other players or coaches. The panel did not specify, who suspect she may be of ambiguous gender. These women are not seeking out medical remediation for their conditions. Indeed, the assumption is that their genetic abnormalities are giving them an advantage in their chosen field. The new recommendation defines people who are intersex or of ambiguous gender as deficient and requiring treatment. Any abnormalities are defined as problems, not by the people whom they affect, but by external groups who are distanced from any experience of them. Even more worrying, the new recommendation medicalizes not only genetic abnormalities, but any testosterone levels that deviates from the norm. It suggests that all women should fall within a certain range of hormone expression in order to be women. It implies that deviance requires intervention. Professional sports is a festival of the statistically deviant. That's one reason I love Howard Schatz's portrait series of world-class athletes, the source of the image at the top of this post. Specializing in different disciplines yields a diverse range of fitness and mastery. There are some kinds of specialization that we shouldn't ask for or encourage others to attempt. Football for the brain trauma and sometimes the eating troubles that come with ballet. Think of these as the human equivalents of the grotesqueries of bulldogs. But Chan's exceptionality is unchosen. She has simply found the niche in which her body, coupled with hard work, can allow her to excel. I like the way the article is written, but I'm not totally convinced. I don't think having testosterone levels found in men should become a standard for winning women. The article says that the I.O.C. can require these women to reduce the amount of testosterone that they produce, but it should not pretend that it is doing them a favor. Well, the I.O.C. is not supposed to be doing favors to athletes who may or may not be eligible to participate in women's sports. It is supposed to make rules to make the sport fair for all eligible participants. A woman is not seeing a doctor to be cured. That's not the doctor's job. He or she is there to help the athlete become eligible if she isn't, nothing else. But I agree, these specific rules are arbitrary. Now let's see what comments this article has generated. These are just a few of the comments. If you want to read all the comments, the link is in the description. Jake says, I feel like you've skipped the most important part though. What the I.O.C. is really saying is that they've picked a definition of what it means to be eligible to compete in women's sports, and that definition includes some constraint on hormone levels. Don't you need to offer an alternative suggestion for what it means to qualify for women's events in order to criticize where they draw the line? Forget about defining intersex or of ambiguous gender as defining and requiring treatment. We have a category called women's sports, and we have to apply the eligible or not eligible label to every human individual. What is your proposed rule of applying that label? Or alternatively, do you propose abolishing the category altogether? Excellent point, Jake. The article says nothing regarding eligibility. It only criticizes the current rules. The article would have gained immensely if it had offered some suggestions for a better eligibility rule. But of course the author wouldn't do that because then that suggested rule could be criticized as well. Randy says, every time you draw a line, you get people who benefit from where you drew it and people who are harmed by it. If you divide people based on the year they were born, then kids born in January benefit and kids born in December are hurt. Just do something and expect there will be people complaining. No way to avoid it. When it comes to gender, it seems the most reliable is DNA. If you are XX, you are a woman. If you are anything else, you are not. Picking a level of certain hormones seems very arbitrary. That's an interesting point. Unfortunately, I lack the technical background to judge if DNA alone can determine gender. I think there are other elements like RNA that may affect the result. But I understand Randy suggests using genetic criteria to help determine sex. I think when judges choose hormones instead, they seem to have chosen criteria that selected according to elements that directly affect an athlete's performance, which is not always the case of DNA. We would need to consult a professional in the area for a good understanding. Our cousin says, this story, and for that matter, the Caster-Semenya affair, make more sense if you think of the Olympics as having the two categories, women and open, rather than men. Dutty and Castor are getting caught up by the question of whether they definitively fit as women. The stick here is not they'd be kicked out of competition, but they'd compete in open, which is to say against men, at which point both athletes are likely to be very fast but nowhere near world class. The waters are muddied further by transgender athletes. An MTF athlete named Michelle Jumares competed for a while as a downhill mountain biker in Canada. She followed the protocols, was on hormones for the requisite 2 years before competing, and so forth. Michelle won the national championships in a sport that privileged strength. Jumares stands 5 feet 9 inches, unremarkable for a man, but pretty tall for a woman, and races at 170 pounds. She was a multi-time national champion. These women don't want to compete in an open class. They want to compete in the women's category, and not being able to do that would seem their womanhood was being questioned, and they wouldn't accept that. As for transgender athletes, this is a whole new debate I decided to avoid, but I'm just going to say that I think a transgender athlete who is biologically male and who passed through male puberty will always have some unfair advantages against biological women, considering muscle mass and bone density, among other factors, even if the testosterone levels of the body are lowered. In sports, what matters is biology, not who you identify with. Alex says, what happens if when virtually all female competitors have an ambiguous biological gender? In a world where sex is literally 100% binary, you can reasonably sustain both. 1. The idea of sports as a pure celebration of physical excellence. 2. Self-distinct sporting events. The moment you get any kind of sex fuzziness, you have to throw one of these things out of the window. If the people in the fuzzy region get to choose to compete as women, it is unfair for the less fuzzy women. With a large enough population, you would completely hide the less fuzzy women from the events. At which point, why have sex-distinct events at all? Of course, if you remove the distinction, then suddenly almost none of the fuzzy women will get to compete either. Of course, then we run into another justification for sex-distinct events. Because 50% of the population is female and justifiably want to see people like them competing and winning sporting events too. But that purpose might not be served if most women don't identify with the actual competitors and winners. in which case the I.O.C. would be completely justifying their policy, or in a policy forcing the fuzzy to compete in men's events. Alex raises a fundamental issue. People, in this case women, who participate in competitions want to see people like them competing and winning. There's a problem if most women cannot identify with the other competitors and winners. The winners offer an ideal goal to achieve. Could that be the case of women with male characteristics? That's a good question. Roque replies to Alex. I cannot imagine a justification for the I.O.C. or any other sports organization to require an athlete to undergo surgery or a drug regimen to change what is a natural aspect of her body. It is possible, if these athletes with hyperandrogenism are a distinct enough group, that if there are enough of them, that the I.O.C. might create a class of sports for them, say, the 400 meters men's, women's, and hyperandrogenes, or intersex, or non-standard sex, or whatever. That is, if the goal is to have a kind of baseline of likeness among the competitors in an event. However, it is inhuman to demand that an athlete undergo known medically necessary medical procedures. It is especially inhuman if these procedures are to reduce that athlete's athletic ability. Roque offers a useful counterpoint. Roque says it is inhuman to demand that an athlete undergo non-medically necessary medical procedures, especially to reduce the athlete's performance. And I tend to agree with Roque. But these athletes really want to compete, and with women. This is why a separate category wouldn't work and would even be considered offensive. No matter what the solution offered, it will always be considered controversial, and some people will complain and feel devalued. Kristen says, if it were a male who landed in the middle spectrum of hormones and was competing in an event such as gymnastics or figure skating, where small stature, balance, and dexterity are more important than brute strength, would he be required to take steroids? If not, and I suspect not, then this is BS. I see some commenters, wanting to define women very narrowly, with anyone outside the norm deemed a man or slightly more tactfully part of an open, non-female category of competition. This reflects a couple of red flags. One, society is much more willing to tolerate a feminine man than a masculine woman, i.e., men have more freedom to be unique while women are expected to fit a smaller social norm. 2. The male is still seen as better than the female, reflected in the notion that the only reason to segregate by gender is to give women a fair shot, as if there aren't sports at which women are naturally better than men. Cough, marathon swimming, cough. The reason why sexes are segregated in competitions is to give women a fair shot in most cases. Yes, there are a few cases of sports in which women do have the upper hand, and in those cases you could even argue sex segregation is to give males a fair shot. But in most cases, especially in this specific case of track and field athletics, men have the advantage of larger muscle mass, testosterone levels, among other biological factors. If she's unhappy with that, I suggest abolishing men's and women's categories altogether and making just one for everybody in all sports. If she wouldn't like that, and I suspect she wouldn't, then this is BS. Definitely this whole issue is controversial and the debate is intense. Well, that's the end for now. What did you think of the article and the comments? Did you agree with any of that? Do you think the I.O.C's rules have a resemblance with the situation in which Harrison Bergeron, the character, found himself in the story? Write that in the comments. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you want to keep track of the new videos I'm going to post, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next video we'll be discussing equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, and how that is presented in Harrison Bergeron, the story. We're going to take a look at yet another controversial issue. So, until the next video, see you all then.